So we have some news when it comes to the dates and location for this year's WrestleMania, next year's WrestleMania, and the WrestleMania after that. We got a WrestleMania dump last night because WWE has announced the dates and locations of WrestleMania 37, WrestleMania 38, and WrestleMania 39. Now, of course, the date and location of WrestleMania has been something that certainly a lot of people have been discussing about over the last couple of weeks or so. Way back when in September, we got that report that WrestleMania this year, at the time next year, but this year was going to be moved to Raymond James Stadium, the site of last year's WrestleMania, or at least the intended site of last year's WrestleMania. And this week we had the information that actually WrestleMania's date was going to be pushed back 2 weeks from its original date back in March. So WWE finally put an end to all of this hearsay and speculation about the date of this year's WrestleMania, but almost unexpectedly as well, they announced the dates and locations for the next two WrestleManias too. So let's get into it, because WWE has announced the location that the location for WrestleMania 37 has changed. The location was Los Angeles, California, but now WrestleMania 37 will indeed be taking place right there at Raymond James Stadium, because we've also got some new logos to break down. If you're like me, a bit of a logo aficionado when it comes to WrestleMania, we can talk about those in a second. So Raymond James Stadium, of course, was the original location for WrestleMania 36, but of course, as we all know and remember horrifically, the location was moved to the WWE Performance Center in a closed set in Orlando, Florida, due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Now also, it's been announced that this year, once again, like last year, the dates for WrestleMania will take place across 2 dates as opposed to 1, because the dates for WrestleMania 37 are April 10 and April 11. What's also very crucial about this announcement is that it looks like, as of right now, this is going to be the time that fans return inside arenas or stadiums to a WWE televised program, because they also have announced WWE as part of this big WrestleMania announcement that in the coming weeks they will be announcing ticket availability and safety protocols for the event. Now, they haven't openly and outwardly said, right, fans are coming back, WrestleMania 37, Raymond James Stadium, Tampa Bay, Florida. They haven't done that as of yet, but that line in the press release that does say in the coming weeks WWE will be announcing ticket availability and safety protocols for the event, that essentially, if you're going to read between the lines there, that says we're going to have fans there at the event. We're going to have fans there at the arena. Now, how many fans, what the percentages of fans being allowed into the stadium is going to be, I don't know. Of course, Florida is different to quite a lot of states around the country when it comes to the United States, because Florida, their governor and there's representatives there of government have said to WWE and all sports teams for that matter, you can have as many fans as you want in stadiums. There is no limits. Now, obviously, a lot of people have heavily criticised that. I personally think that is absolutely crazy during a pandemic to say, oh, you can have as many people as you want in the stadium. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Of course it matters how many people you have in the stadium. So I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that WWE will be running full stadium for both nights of Raymond James Stadium. That would be absolute madness. What I could see is a scenario where they have maybe 10 or 20, maybe max 25% capacity. Even 25% capacity to me seems like a lot. Of course, Raymond James Stadium can hold, was it 50, 60,000 fans in attendance, possibly even more for pro wrestling, maybe 70. So even 25% seems like a lot to me, and I know obviously it's outdoors, it's socially distanced. We've seen NFL teams start to do it, even more so recently, especially with the playoffs. You had like the Buffalo Bills, didn't they, over the last week, had fans in the stadium for the first time. So I think the safety protocols, again, I don't know, and this is kind of speculation on my part here, but I would assume they're probably going to be looking at 10, 20, 25% capacity. They would also be looking at a scenario where you have to provide a negative COVID test at least 48 hours prior to attending the event. That's what they've done for, say, the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, they had a UFC event last night. It was a similar scenario. That was indoors in Abu Dhabi, but they had fans in attendance there. I think around 2,000 fans in attendance. And essentially, they were told you have to provide a negative COVID test at least 48 hours prior to attending the event. So I would assume that would probably be the scenario. I think if WWE are looking at it from a financial point of view as well for Raymond James Stadium, if they can run it across 2 nights, if they can have 20, 25% capacity, that kind of makes their money back, I would think. So That to me makes the most sense, I think, and I'm really glad that it's actually taking place across 2 days once again. Of course, there were elements of last year's WrestleMania that were frustrating. The fact that it was in the Performance Center and it was no fans, and it was certainly at the very beginning of the pandemic, and there was all this uncertainty, and lots of people could critique it, and they might be right to. Ultimately, WWE made the exact right decision in what they did last year, but I think one of the better things to come out of WrestleMania last year at the Performance Center was that it did take place on Saturday and Sunday. We've seen it before when it comes to Wrestle Kingdom or other events in the past that have done it. When you do these 2-day events, it just feels bigger. It does feel bigger. And obviously WrestleMania, for a long period of time, especially over the last 5-6 years, the shows just got exponentially bigger and longer, to the point that I kind of at some points dreaded watching WrestleMania because I knew it was going to be a 6 or 7 hour show, and that to me is just pure insanity. So to have it across 2 days, not only do you shorten the shows down and make it much easier to watch, much more digestible to actually be able to watch as well, but also it makes WrestleMania just feel like this bigger event. Not only is it the biggest show of the year that WWE does, not only is it the biggest pay-per-view that WWE does, not only is it in this giant stadium and all this pomp and circumstance, but it's almost bigger than just one event. It's a whole weekend. It's more than a pay-per-view. It's way more than a pay-per-view. So I feel the 2-day format of WrestleMania is just the next step of the evolution of WrestleMania, frankly. So I'm very excited for that. But as I mentioned, we also have some news for the other WrestleManias coming next year and the year after that as well, because we have an announcement for WrestleMania 38, because WrestleMania 38 is going to be taking place in AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas. Now, of course, this was the site of WrestleMania 32 back in 2016. At the time, it was what they were saying was over 100,000 people in attendance. Obviously wasn't the case, but certainly it was a big event. Obviously you had the main event of Triple H and Raymond Reigns. You had the great moment with Steve Austin coming out with Shawn Michaels and Mick Foley. I'm sure that because the event's taken place in Texas, now there's going to be all of this discussion about, is Steve Austin going to come back? Is Shawn Michaels going to come back? Is The Undertaker going to come back and wrestle his last final WrestleMania match in his home state of Texas? Those discussions will be ongoing, I'm sure. Those speculation, those rumors will continue to flourish over the course of the next couple of years. Interestingly, when it comes to WrestleMania 38, it's only taking place across 1 day. So it does look like this whole 2-day format is basically just going to be for this year and last year as they deal with the pandemic. I hope that's not the case. I really do hope that's not the case. I do hope that going forward they can look at the success of maybe this year's WrestleMania and one of the successful elements of last year's WrestleMania, which was the 2-day event, and move that across. Because if we get to WrestleMania 38 in 2022 in AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, if we get to that point and once again we're having to deal with a 6-7 hour show, it feels like they've learned nothing. And that's the frustrating thing, because I go back to WrestleMania 32 when it was previously in AT&T Stadium. That show at the end, you had the fans obviously kind of turning on Roman Reigns when he won and beat Triple H for the WWE Championship, but at that point again, the crowd was just so tired. The crowd was so exhausted because they had been there for such a long period of time. I know they say it was over 100,000 fans. It wasn't. It was more like 80,000. Still not a bad number, but it's not 100. So they talk about all of those fans being there, and they were there for 6, 7, maybe even 8 hours watching that event, and it was just madness. And once you get to the main event, arguably the most important match of the show, the fans are tired. They don't care. Even the fans watching at home, they're tired. They're falling asleep. That's the issue. That's the big issue that I have with WrestleMania. So I hope once they get to 2022, and I hope once they get to AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, I hope they get back to the 2-day format. I think that's the best thing for it. I do absolutely think that's the best thing for WrestleMania. I think that's what makes WrestleMania certainly way more watchable in this current format. Obviously, you've got a massive roster. You've got 2 brands, maybe even 3 brands with NXT as well. They all want to and should be involved with WrestleMania. At least they think they should be. So it means you're going to have a long show. If you give yourself 2 days, you give yourself way more time to fit everything in. You give yourself way more time to have 2 shows that are way more easy to digest. And I just don't like that the 1-day format rather. When it comes to WrestleMania in Texas, this was quite surprising, wasn't it? Because obviously we knew that, pretty much most people knew that this year's WrestleMania was going to be moved to Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida. Of course, it makes sense during the pandemic. It's where WWE is based. It's near to their performance center with all of their residencies. They've been in Florida. They have good relations with the Florida government and the Florida administration right now. It makes sense for them to stay where they know they control most of the situation. So that makes a ton of sense. Of course, they had the agreement with the folks over there at Raymond James Stadium anyway for last year. They want to make it up to them. It just, everything makes sense for that one. So I think most people thought that WrestleMania 38 instead would be be in SoFi Stadium, the original place for WrestleMania 37. So this AT&T Stadium one in Texas is quite surprising. What that says to me is that this WrestleMania 38 deal for AT&T Stadium in Texas was done way, way long ago. I think that this was maybe even done last year when they announced that SoFi Stadium was going to be hosting WrestleMania 37. I would assume that even then, I would assume even then they would have thought, actually, you know what, AT&T Stadium's pretty much done, and they've probably gone to Texas and gone, you know what, it makes no sense to move it. They've already got it locked in. There are contracts in these situations. Actually, cities actually physically bid on having WrestleMania in their city because it's such a boost to their economy and such a massive boost for just ticket sales. You have to think of all the tourism people fly in, or they used to. I don't know if they will in 2022, but they used to fly in from all over the world, and it used to be a huge boom to the local economy and all of the local tourist spots, local bars, restaurants, etc., and other facilities. So these cities bid on WrestleMania, and I would assume that this deal for WrestleMania 38 was probably done at the same time as WrestleMania 37 was done for SoFi Stadium. So in terms of moving things around, they probably just couldn't move this one. They went, look, we've got a contract in place. We're already changing one contract for this year's WrestleMania. We can't move another one when it comes to next year. So I think that probably is the case for there. But I mentioned SoFi Stadium there as well because it's been announced that SoFi Stadium will be getting their WrestleMania, but it will be WrestleMania 39, which will be taking place on April 2nd, 2023. And of course, like the WrestleMania 38, not like WrestleMania 36 and 37, this will be taking place across one night. So we are going to get Hollywood WrestleMania eventually, and obviously it's a shame it's not happening this year, but I mean, with the current pandemic, we have to get used to things being cancelled, postponed, pushed back, or just moved to other locations. That's par for the course. I was really excited about this year's Hollywood WrestleMania at SoFi Stadium because if you've seen SoFi Stadium as a venue, as a stadium, it's arguably the best stadium in the world. I mean, state of the art. It only got opened up last year. It's incredible. I mean, if you've seen it, it cost a absolutely astronomical amount to build, something like $1 billion, maybe even more than that. It was crazy. But if you see it, it is, I mean, arguably the best stadium in the world. The facilities, it is state of the art. If you've seen some of the NFL games there, it's insane. It's insane. And I know WWE really wanted to be in that stadium because of just everything that they could do in there. Nothing's off limits in that stadium. It's also another stadium that could hold over 100,000 fans. So I think moving it back a couple of years serves a couple of purposes. I think obviously this year they couldn't do it. There are heavy restrictions in place in California. They're based also as well, WWE in Florida. It makes sense to stay where they are. It doesn't make sense to run SoFi Stadium when you can't get the big attendance in there. You might not be able to get any fans in there. They can control the situation much better if they stay in Florida. So that makes sense. When it comes to would they move it to next year, obviously they've got Texas booked for that stadium there. Maybe they had the relationship, maybe they had the contract with Texas anyway, they couldn't move that one. It makes sense to move it a couple of years because, as I mentioned, SoFi Stadium can hold over 100,000 fans. They want to break the attendance records that they apparently set in AT&T Stadium. They're hoping, I think, come 2023, there might be some element of normality back to everyday life, and they might actually be able to get over 100,000 fans into the stadium at that period of time. So I think that's probably the scenario there of, okay, we're going to move to Raymond James Stadium this year because we can control that. We have relationships there. It's a lot easier for us to run. Then obviously next year with Texas, they probably had an agreement in place. And then the following year when it comes to California, obviously they're hoping things have died down by then. Things are a little bit back to normality and they can get this big indoor attendance record at that show. I think that's probably the scenario that they're going for there. So that's the situation for all of the WrestleManias. It's certainly interesting, certainly is a big announcement, but now we know the layout going forward for all of the WrestleMania events. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these WrestleMania announcements? WrestleMania 37 in Raymond James Stadium, WrestleMania 38 in AT&T Stadium in Texas, and WrestleMania 39 in SoFi Stadium in California. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, WrestleMania, AEW, Impact Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to WrestleNews 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.